Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Live from the View. My name is Kathleen O'Brien, and I will be your host for tonight. And we have a very, very special treat. We have been doing a three-part series with our dear friends at Cheekwood, and today is the third in that three-part series. We spoke first with Jane McLeod and learned an overview of Cheekwood, its 60th history, that they're celebrating this year, and a little bit about the Chihuly exhibit. Then last week we spoke with Marion Sullivan and learned an awful lot about the beautiful sculptures that are there. And tonight we have the Vice President, and he's got such a big title here. It's wonderful. Vice President of Gardens and Facilities. That's a huge job, with Peter Grimaldi. Peter has been at Cheekwood for the past 3 years and has had a lot of work under his belt already accomplished. And he's in charge of a lot of things, including 12 gardens to oversee. And he's going to talk specifically about 2 of them with us tonight so that we can learn a little bit more about what's been going on at Cheekwood. So welcome, Peter. Welcome to Live from the View.
Kathleen, thank you for having me. It's a wonderful opportunity to interface with the public and tell them about what we have going on when sometimes interfacing with the public is a little bit harder these days. So really appreciate the chance to talk with you guys tonight.
Well, it's our pleasure. And Cheekwood is nestled right in the city of Nashville in a quiet space, and we don't always see what's going on there, but we do know, and what we've been excited about sharing is all of the recent work that has happened there, and you've been in charge of a good bit of that. So let's just dig in. Let's talk first about the Bracken Foundation Children's Garden. So tell us about the space there before the project began, and how was this area previously utilized by Cheekwood?
Sure. The Children's Garden occupies what was historically referred to as the Howe Meadow. You can see in the slide an open lawn beneath a high canopy of shade trees. And the space is really very important to the connectivity and integration of the different gardens on the estate. So kind of finds itself at the end of the Eastern Garden progression. And as I said, Howe Meadow between the Howe Garden, which was Cheekwood's original garden when it became a botanical garden and began to develop gardens with special interests. So between Cheekwood's original garden, the Howe Garden, and the historic core. So nestled between, the botanical garden presentation at Cheekwood and the original estate layer. So it was a space that had a lot of potential for development, but also had to tie together some of the existing elements and features of the property. And as you can see in the slide, just like most places at Cheekwood, we're going to figure out a way to activate it. And it was in this meadow that the Thursday Night Out program really kind of got going. And you can see a stage situated at the base of this hill. So family program, come out, with your kids, with your family, and enjoy a concert in the Howe Meadow.
So you had a beautiful palette to begin with. And I think one of the challenges that you all face is when you've got 12 gardens, how do you have each one be distinctively different, yet work with all of the others that are there so that you have a beautiful tapestry of gardens that link together? So that's got to be something that is thought about when you are designing and planning something. So tell us how that all worked. How did you approach the designing and planning for the children's garden?
So step one is to assemble the team, right? To work alongside Team Cheekwood, if you will, and professional design consultants, and ultimately the general contractor to help build it. But project was led by a designer, and now Cheekwood's designer in residence, Trey Fromey of 3 Fromey Design, based out of Florida, working directly with HDLA, local landscape architecture firm. So really, step one is you would describe as inventory analysis. Cheekwood sits down in a charrette or various levels of facilitated conversations and crafts the vision for the garden, right? What the children's garden at Cheekwood will be, right? And so, in a nutshell, the children's garden was meant to be beautiful. It was meant to be original, but at the end of the day, authentic to Cheekwood. And of course, check all the boxes and hit all of the marks with respect to activating a space for the children. So you start by talking and outlining some of the vision and the goals for the space long before the pencil hits the drafting paper. And then from there you may move through different phases of design, kind of building in and testing each design iteration against that program that you developed, circling back to make sure that the design, the plans on the page are meeting all of the goals that you set out for yourself. And once you get far enough along in that process, plans begin to take shape to a point where you can render them in sketches. And what you guys are looking at here are some original hand-drawn and rendered sketches done by Trey, the designer. He is, of course, going to be the first one to be able to envision and visualize these spaces. Part of my job, our job, is to help other people picture them and place them into the space at Cheekwood, before anything even, starts being constructed. But some of these sketches, often accompany those earlier designs to establish intent, not only for the landscape architects that kind of make these sketches something that can actually be implemented, but also for the general contractors. This is not only this is not something that's built to plans and specs. This is an artistic endeavor. It's meant to be highly activated for a particular audience, and it's something that you kind of want everybody to kind of understand what the goal is from the beginning.
So lots of planning, preparation, getting the right people on the bus. You say you've been there 3 years. When do you know when the original thoughts to create a children's garden first came about with Cheekwood? Yeah.
So the children's garden is one of the primary new features included in Cheekwood's current master plan. The master plan being a mechanism of our strategic plan, right? Which was published in 2015. So we have kind of come to the end of the service life of that document, but it was Cheekwood and the leadership at Cheekwood looking around 5 years ago, realizing that the family demographic was something that we wanted to focus on institutionally, based on a success of temporary exhibitions and different programming throughout the years at Cheekwood. This was one of our primary growth segments, young families and kids. And so in order to really back that up, we wanted to create a space for the kids to have for themselves. And not coincidentally, one of those child or family programs that was so successful that kind of helped us realize that a children's garden would be important was the trains display, which has become a permanent exhibition now, born out of a temporary seasonal exhibition that then lived in the space that is now occupied by the children's garden. The trains, moved up the road to the Seasons. They're still there in their newfound glory. But so yeah, it was just kind of looking at our visitorship, our membership, and responding to the needs of that constituency, and saying, what can we do for you? What can we build to kind of draw out all of these people that are already coming? Kind of told us what they want, and the answer to that was the children's garden.
Well, the vision is absolutely gorgeous, and you just illustrated that nothing happens magically. It takes a lot of years of visualizing and, as we said, getting the right people involved. So when you came to the point where it was groundbreaking and then construction following that, that must have been an exciting moment. Tell us about that and that process.
Sure. Well, the groundbreaking really serves two functions, Kathleen. The first of which is, just basically to get started, right? You got to start to finish. But likely the more important function is it's an opportunity to celebrate, all of this. We just talked about all of this visioning and program development and planning and design. That takes some time. And, before you've put a shovel in the ground or laid the first brick, so to speak, you've already, accomplished a lot and produced a huge body of work. So to come to the moment where, that becomes a reality in the form of tangible work in the ground, that's a big moment. And you want all of the supporters to be there. We got pictured here, most, if not all of the Bracken family, Richard and Judith, their children, grandchildren, who were, so gracious and supportive as the lead donors on the project. Some of the Cheekwood leadership, me there on the far left, showing everybody how to, hold the shovel. And then some kids, in the foreground to, make sure that we had our customers in mind.
And how long did the project take?
In construction, just, it's all a blur. Let's say it took 18 months, Kathleen.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you were there every day, right? Rain or shine?
Do what?
I bet you were there almost every day.
Almost every day. For better or for worse, the children's garden site is almost right outside the door to my office. And I had to walk either by it or through the construction site to get to where I was going. So very hands-on for sure. And it's important, as the owner, I guess, for a couple of reasons. You want things to be done right. We had great partners in the Carter Group and all of the talented subcontractors that supported them on the build team. But also, I enjoy, and I see it part of my job, is to make sure that the contractors know why they're there, and the importance, the significance of the project. This is not just another building or not just another fountain, like Cheekwood. Have you ever been to Cheekwood? You know what's going on here. Come over here. Let me show you this, to kind of create some buy-in from those folks and, make it just as special of a project for them as it is for everybody else on the team. So, it was definitely a journey, the construction phase. Sometimes feels like you're going backwards before you go forward, but it was well worth it. Absolutely.
Well, that had to have been just a great day. So it took 18 months to do it. This is relatively new. So tell us when you debuted it to the public.
Sure. Opened on March 7th of this year.
Perfect timing, right?
So almost exactly 6 months ago. And, you say perfect timing, and we started by, this is 1 week after the hurricane went through East Nashville, and then just a couple weeks before COVID really landed in Middle Tennessee. And we spent, at first, which was a natural reaction, kind of saying, "Oh gosh, this could not have come at a worse time." You almost feel bad, right? Because you don't want to promote your new and exciting thing, amidst some of the really the true tragedies that kind of happening in the market. But then really quickly realized that Cheekwood's mission is important as much now than it ever has been. Whether or not your neighborhood was impacted by the hurricane or you've been cooped up in your house for the past 6 months. Cheekwood is here to stimulate the mind and nurture the spirit, get people outside, plug them into nature, and maybe even transport them to somewhere else, a happier place. Basically appreciate beauty and the wonders of the natural world and art. And when you're facing so much adversity and throughout the world, and especially here in Nashville with some of our neighbors up in East Tennessee, like that Cheekwood's just as important as ever. And so it really kind of reinforced our vision and our pride in, our new offerings, and yeah, feel good about it.
Well, it also provided a place for people to go to, because I know you guys are practicing all the protocols for safety during COVID. But yours, as opposed to, you do have some indoor places, but as it pertains to the gardens and even the trails, you provide an opportunity for people to be outside during COVID, where they can be safe and they can social distance and they can enjoy a family day or a quiet day by themselves. So I understand that it was a difficult time to lay all this wonderful news down during a very difficult time, but then you almost came to people's rescue in finding places of respite during these troubled times.
I could not agree more, and thank you for pointing that out. And the children's garden too. Many of these new gardens and features at Cheekwood. This is not a concert that we had to cancel, right? This is something that we built for the next 100 years, and it's gonna, it was there when we closed. It was there when we reopened, and we agree with you that Cheekwood, early on and continues to be one of the safer options for people in Nashville to come out and enjoy themselves safely. You do not have to touch anything. You don't have to go inside. You don't have to get too close to people if you don't want to. Yeah.
So I see in the slide, the one in the upper left-hand corner, where Jane, the president and CEO of Cheekwood, is speaking, I see this beautiful turtle. And I know turtles are just one of the elements there. And I'd love for you to talk about the turtles, but talk a bit about what elements do exist in this children's garden.
Sure. Well, to address the slides directly, they do a good job of breaking up the space. But the garden is really kind of anchored by a central water axis, which begins with the lily pool. You can see in the upper left-hand corner of your slide here, flanked by the two spitting turtles. So that water axis did a couple of things for us. Number one, it allowed us to tie the garden into the historic estate by drawing directly on that precedent for a formal architectural fountain overflowing and running into and through an increasingly naturalized water course, right? Fountain at the top of the hill, water runs downhill into and through the landscape. That's Cheekwood all the way. And then also, the water created an opportunity to introduce some of or one of at least the other themes and features of the garden, which is the natural turtle pond at the base of the water sequence. So turtles were are a theme throughout, especially along the water course, to celebrate some of our great native fauna here in Middle Tennessee. So that really, again, kind of anchors the garden, that central water axis. And then there are a number of other primary spaces within the garden. The studio pavilion, you can see on the right side of the slide, is the most significant structure in the space, and really kind of holding down the fort on the right side, eastern side of the garden. And it is meant for assembly. It's meant for instruction. It's meant to be just a beautiful thing in the landscape. Architecturally, it draws its cues from the historic Frisk Learning Center, the original garage and stable complex on the property, and some of its finishes and features. As far as the kids are concerned, it's got a balcony, a mezzanine, a secret passageway to crawl through and explore. And then surrounding the studio pavilion, we've got little woods, which I mentioned some of our early visioning and planning exercise, which included focus groups and people, external stakeholders at Cheekwood, realized that a real important, not requirement for the space was to have a dedicated space for the youngest children, right? So Little Woods is designed for our youngest user group, 2 to 4, barely walking, and a space where there are a number of, activated play features where mom can just park the stroller, let the kid out, and really not worry about them kind of escaping out the back. So Little Woods is kind of fenced in completely and designed for, again, our youngest users, and includes the one of 2 interactive water features on the property. The second interactive water feature is shown here on the left, which is the wishing well, also reflective of an original feature of the estate, although this one kind of constantly overflows water and intermittently and randomly gushes water to kind of catch the users, especially the kids, by surprise. So there you've got something that just at face value, kids love getting wet, splashing around a little bit. It's also a nod to the historic estate layer. And hey, you know what? We'll put a little, lesson on the native water ecology in there too, and score some STEAM points or whatever. So happy about that. And then another one of the defining feature areas in the children's garden is the adventure path, the woodland adventure path, which kind of begins up there towards Little Woods. The top of the adventure path kind of spurs off of a wooded labyrinth, and then includes this rope bridge, some log hoppers, rope bridge, balance beams that ultimately deliver you back into the core of the garden.
So is this all what we're seeing now? Is this part of your TOTS program, or is that something different?
No, what you're seeing now is our permanent and permanent and, let's say, unprogrammed features in the garden. They're there every day. And, some of it is may be considered directed play, Kathleen. Some of it is just an opportunity for kids to dig into the quarry in the Little Woods and, just pick up a fistful of rocks, right? And less structured play, get the kids out there to create their own experience in the children's garden. So that's important. And that became very clear in the early planning, is that this is not directly a demonstration garden. It is not directly a teaching garden, right? It's a space for kids. It's a space that was intended for them to make their own, to discover, explore, and create their own experiences. Now, with that said, and one of the programs that really helped Cheekwood to appreciate the significance, the importance of building a children's garden is Tuesday, is the TOTS program, which was super duper successful, historically produced 1 day a week on Tuesdays, children's garden, brand new venue, created the opportunity to transfer that, to offer that on more of a daily basis, five days a week. And they've got everything from toddler age kids to kind of drop in, do story time, accompanied readings, art and garden activities. This is all led by our very knowledgeable and friendly education staff. And something that we're kind of hoping to get back to, Kathleen. So, COVID-19 has kind of shifted all of our TOTS programming to a virtual experience, which education team is doing a great job of. Things that you can do at home, that's offered on our website and social media channels on a weekly basis. And then the plan is, like everything else, people say, normal, new normal, whatever. When kids can come back to Cheekwood and we feel comfortable assembling them in larger groups, then we're going to move back to that in-person experience, but only after it's safe to do so. So the TOTS is really one of the most successful programs at Cheekwood, and the Children's Garden is just another venue to host that in.
Yeah, these kids look very happy. I think they're enjoying it, and there's probably their senses have just been put on overload with just being out there in nature and then seeing this gorgeous sculpture and the gardens themselves and all of the interactive pieces for just experiencing. Maybe they're just being there, but seeing and doing things differently. So this has got to mean a lot to kids, and it's got to mean a lot to families. What are your hopes in terms of what this does mean to the Nashville community and to kids?
My hope is that they come back. They come back again and again. As I just said a moment ago, not a demonstration garden or even perhaps a teaching garden, meant to be a space in which the kids create their own experience. Well, that's a relationship based on a relationship that these kids develop with the space, right? It's just an outdoor venue to activate their imaginations, to make it their own, to weave their own story, their storyline through the space. So the goal in the community is to effectively deliver our mission in a meaningful way to that youngest audience. And I think that we very often overestimate the jumping off point and the introduction of kids into nature. We just want to get them out there. And in my experience, historically, a lot of things about Cheekwood are big and old, right? Maybe a little bit stuffy if you're a 6-year-old. There are a lot of things about Cheekwood that don't touch. Maybe a little fancy, right? And therefore intimidating. So Cheekwood is, everything that we're doing is an effort to make the institution more accessible, more approachable, more relatable, okay? And children is just one component of that initiative. The kids are just one component of that initiative. And we wanted to create their own, they should have their own space at Cheekwood. And now they do. With that said, it's a garden for children of all ages, and it's a garden for people of varying interests. It is a true the plant palette is is very horticulturally sophisticated. The architectural design and appointments are very artistic and sophisticated, and it is just simply a beautiful, beautiful space. So the hope for families and people in the Nashville community is that they come out, and like many other spaces at Cheekwood, they make it their own, and kind of just enjoy it.
Well, I'm glad that you're allowing children of all ages. I would imagine that adults are enjoying this equally, and it can bring out the child within even while you're there. Before we leave the children's garden, I've just got to ask you one more thing about the turtles. Is there a program that you have as a rehabilitation program for turtles?
Yes.
Tell us about that. That sounds intriguing, and I'm not sure people know about that.
So we had, based on, everybody loves a turtle, right? And you build, you build a pond, maybe even name it the turtle pond, and some of those plans and renderings that we looked at earlier on. Well, as it turns out, it is illegal to collect and relocate native turtles in Middle Tennessee. So we wanted to do this the right way, and Cheekwood is now holds an education permit with the Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency. And we kind of support the TWRA as a potential sort of rehoming site, if you will. Turtles that may be confiscated from the illegal pet trade, or turtles that grew up in a nature center that need a better home. Not necessarily injured or sick turtles. It's not a rehabilitation facility, but it is a sanctuary for native turtles. So kind of another connection to the native ecosystem environment at Cheekwood. And so we built a proper zoological enclosure at the base of that water course. We've got one of our team members, and the garden supervisor in charge of the children's garden, is a professional zookeeper by training, so they could not be in better care. We got 5 turtles in there now, more on the way, and they are living it up. Some of these turtles, a few of the guys and girls that are in there now, spent all of their, most of their life in 55-gallon aquariums. And now they're in, many thousands of gallons in a pool where we kind of keep the water clean, and they're fed every day. We're getting offcuts, fresh produce from Cafe 29 of the Frisk Learning Center. I kind of joked, one of my running jokes was, what are all the native turtles at Cheekwood going to say when they see this little sanctuary that we've built in the middle of the new children's garden? So it's a good opportunity to kind of connect with the kids on just another level, and also I guess kind of do our part to celebrate and protect that genetic diversity in the the native Tennessee invertebrates.
Well, I believe one of the original turtles from the band The Turtles lives in Nashville and teaches at Belmont. You should get the turtles out there and have them look at your turtles.
That's a wonderful idea.
Very cool. Well, then this is outstanding. And what a treasure and resource for families in Nashville and surrounding that come and visit. It's just beautiful, and all the time and the planning and the work and financial resources that have gone into this. The Brackens have just created a lovely, lovely thing with you all here, and it's a jewel. It's just a jewel. Shall we go to the Japanese garden now?
Let's do it.
Okay. So tell us the history and what led you to begin this restoration project.
Sure. And truly was a restoration project and thereby distinct from the children's garden, which was brand new out of the ground, and also distinct from the sculpture trail, which y'all learned about in the past 2 weeks, which was more of a renovation, right, and a heavier renovation than how we approached the Japanese garden, which is itself historic to Cheekwood, originally envisioned in the 1970s and constructed over a period of time throughout the 1980s, and opened in the early 90s. So we've got something again that it has been there, is already, an established feature at Cheekwood, and that we wanted to really kind of uplift and celebrate. So like to say a couple more things to that end. The Japanese garden at Cheekwood, I say about Cheekwood in general all the time that we could easily be celebrating this place just because it's big and old, right? When the truth of the matter is, it's simply gorgeous, and the historic elements of the house and the gardens are beautiful, and they're beautiful now for the same reason they were beautiful in 1929. They were designed well by a brilliant architect. And so the exact same thing can be said about the Japanese garden, designed by David Harris Engel, one of the earliest American landscape architects to really formally practice in the design and development of Japanese gardens in the United States. And he was hired to carry out the vision for a Japanese garden at Cheekwood, which was born out of the Ikebana Club and the women that participated in that club. So, the Japanese garden, in a way, I think, is one of the truest reflections of the interest of the people in Nashville and the Nashville community. Just as I said earlier, the children's garden was kind of motivated in response to the apparent needs and the articulated needs of our visitors and members. Well, you can describe Cheekwood in any number of ways, and I think very sincerely, I like to describe Cheekwood as an honest reflection of the horticultural interests of the people of Nashville, right? I mentioned at the very beginning, children's garden right next to our oldest garden, the Howe Garden. Well, the Garden Club in Nashville was interested in preserving, what was already a historic and important plant collection and celebrating native plants, and Cheekwood provided a venue to do that, right? Burr Garden, Sensory Garden, kind of was the next garden to come along and provided just a little bit of spark for the Herb Society to develop their own garden, right? And the same thing can be said about the Japanese garden. Nashville, as many of you know, has a long and important economic relationship, cultural relationship with Japan, between Nissan, Mitsubishi, Bridgestone, right? And so it's just kind of was and continues to be a venue to celebrate that cultural link. So it was really the generosity and the shared vision of the Blevins family, Bill and Melba Blevins, their children, representing now the second and third generation of that family to support the Japanese garden at Cheekwood, that kind of helped us realize that, hey, we're getting some new things here and we're tuning this sculpture trail up in a serious way. Well, this Japanese garden needs some love too. And so we embarked on the restoration.
What would you say, Peter, are a couple of the key elements of a garden that makes it Japanese?
So the Japanese garden Shomuen at Cheekwood contains several key elements that are featured in even different kinds of Japanese gardens. And so I would say the most significant feature of the Japanese garden is the view at the base of the hill, right across that dry pond and up into the hills beyond. So it was a garden that was originally meant to be viewed from that singular perspective, a viewing garden, which is very much an authentic feature of Japanese gardens. And so we wanted to preserve that. Kind of getting back to my earlier point, it is while the Children's Garden had a brand new program, and there were different things in the sculpture trail that had, program elements that we wanted to feature, enhance, maybe introduce new. The Japanese garden was already good, right? So we just kind of wanted to celebrate. It was really good, brilliant. We just wanted to celebrate that original design layer. So, I would say the most distinctive thing about the Japanese garden at Cheekwood is the fact that your journey starts at the top of the mountain. And it is revealed to you in a very, very controlled sequence of garden rooms and passageways, right? The garden on face value, it's a mountain landscape. You're meant to go down to the bottom and come to the top, and look up to the top. But if you think about, your relationship with the tops of mountains and the experience of maybe making the decision to go up there and wondering what the view up there might look like, that's kind of classically based on standing at the bottom and looking up. Well, here you start at the top and you work your way down, at which point Engel, the original designer, he's got your attention and he is controlling now your perspective and kind of focusing that perspective in order to create the drama of that reveal at the base of the hill in the viewing pavilion. So that I would say, the key features of the Japanese garden are, is the experience. It is kind of by far the most directed experience, choreographed experience in any of the gardens at Cheekwood, and the restoration really honored that original intent, but also created opportunities for people to enjoy it in different ways as well.
And a lovely place just to be, to reflect and go and share and just connect with nature. And because there's not a lot of things that compete, the elements don't compete, they just work well together. So it feels like it has such a calming, a lot of gardens do, but this one, Japanese in particular, because it just feels like you're supposed to just be, and we don't do that enough. And it looks like, from what you all have done, plus the restoration, you've caught the eye of a lot of people, and many of them from Japan, in terms of support and in terms of actually coming to see what you've done. So you've had some pretty impressive visitors to come to the Japanese garden there.
Absolutely. And that starts with the folks joining Jane, Kristen, and I in this picture in the upper left, and that was now once removed Consul General Kobayashi. So I mentioned the important economic relationship between Nashville and Japan. Well, so there's a Japanese consulate in Nashville serving this region of the United States, and So Cheekwood has a long and well-established relationship with the consulate, and they have been great partners of Cheekwood for many years, and to help us activate the Japanese garden, but also in this project, help to lend support, even more. And then, also in this picture, it was within the same year Cheekwood hosted both the United States ambassador to Japan, Bill Haggerty, and then also, the Japanese ambassador to the United States. So, yes, these are important people, and important people supported the planning and development of this restoration project. But it's just, kind of goes to show that here is a venue for the people of Nashville who've got a strong economic, cultural connection to Japan, for the Japanese people in Nashville to come and celebrate that culture, that heritage, and some of the traditional elements of Japanese gardens.
Well, it looks like they're all smiling. So I think they've been very happy with what you all have done there. Especially Nashville's a different culture, and the fact that you were so true to the Japanese culture in terms of creating this garden and sustaining it, that means a lot. It's authentic. It's the real deal, and that just makes it even more of a treasure for Nashville. You want to talk about some of the key enhancements that you did take on in terms of the restoration?
Absolutely. And this is a good slide to talk about some of those key enhancements, and talk about some of the direct support facilitated by the folks at the consulate, as well as the Japanese Japanese government in Tokyo. So to kind of put that in perspective, there are three primary goals of the redesign, well, I should say the design or the planned restoration of the Japanese garden. And I'm remiss in not saying sooner that this project was led by Sadafumi Uchiyama, who is the garden curator at the Portland Japanese Garden, preeminent Japanese garden in North America, and just a lovely man, professional landscape architect and third generation gardener. And so Uchiyama-san and the team at Cheekwood set out to accomplish three things. Number one, increase accessibility through the space. Okay, this is a mountain landscape, right, in a box, so to speak, and mountains built on the side of a hill. We need to get people down to the bottom of that hill, and so accessibility, just like all three projects, Children's Garden, Sculpture Trail, Japanese Garden, whether you are pushing a stroller or maybe differently abled, we want to help you get to and through these garden spaces safely and comfortably. And so we did exactly that. Number two, horticultural enhancements, which almost goes without saying. And then number three was to really celebrate and reorganize in a way some of the key features in the garden to be more authentic. Okay. And one example of that is just simply the gate structures in the garden, starting at the top of the garden, and the progression of those gate structures. The concept of a portal, right, or a threshold to mark either the beginning or incremental steps along a journey. This is very important to the basic elements of Japanese garden design. And there's a hierarchy within the specific gate structures. Okay, they're meant to be in a particular order, and they're meant to be in a particular point along the way in the experience. So Uchiyama-san kind of moved and replaced, enhanced some of the gate structures. And then also really helped to lead a project supported by the Japanese Ministry of Land, the Interior, Transport, and Tourism. Okay, basically the Japanese equivalent of the Department of the Interior. And they operate or administrate a program that directly supports the restoration, renovation of Japanese gardens outside of Japan. So the mission here is based on the Japanese kind of recognizing the fact that there are Japanese gardens throughout the world, and have been for several hundred years, right? Well, some of those gardens maybe have lost a little bit of their authenticity. So we're going to find deserving candidates throughout the world and invest directly in tuning them up, so to speak. So this is, what does that look like exactly? Well, the program fields a team through the Japanese Federation of Landscape Contractors. They literally send a team of 6 craftsmen and master gardeners from Japan to work directly in the garden, right? So they're flying these guys over, they're paying for their room and board, and they're putting them on the ground at Cheekwood to really, do some real work and implement some of the features in the garden. So to kind of answer a bit of the question of what are some of the key features that make this authentically a Japanese garden, you can answer that by describing what that team chose to work on and what that team chose to enhance in the garden. And really the primary feature that they wanted to work on was strengthening the dry stream and the waterfall that runs through the garden. They were immediately and naturally drawn to that feature. You can see in the lower left-hand picture a bridge, which is now crossing the top of that waterfall. But the idea was to install new boulders and re-articulate some of the boulders in the landscape to increase the strength of that feature and really make it more of a central feature in the garden. The art of placing stones in the landscape, has great and deep significance in Japanese gardening, not all of which I, pretend to understand. But definitely, the precise placement and articulation of these stones in the landscape is something that, I think in Japanese gardens, it perhaps more than anywhere else, just so gracefully celebrates that thin line between nature and the built environment, right? This is meant to be something that mimics nature, but it's done in a way that's maybe just slightly abstracted, to be artistic and creative. And at the end of the day, it's just sort of quietly beautiful. So they focused on that, and also helped to reconstruct the Tsukubai basin and that arrangement behind the viewing pavilion, which you can see in the upper left-hand picture here in these slides. So the Tsukubai is a hand-washing basin activated in traditional Japanese tea ceremonies. And it was very important to them that they sort of articulated that basin in a precise way and, kind of complemented it by different combinations of plant material. One of the stone lanterns in the garden to make that just, that much more authentic. So they were all there, like I said, volunteers from the landscape contractors, owners, operators of their own businesses in Japan, kind of came from throughout Japan to work with the garden master Hiromu Terashita, who I understand to be one of the top 3 or 4 garden masters in Japan right now. So as Uchiyama-san, Sadafumi Uchiyama, the garden designer, let's say he's one of the most important Japanese garden authorities in the country right now. Well, he said, of Terashita-san, he's, to put his mark on the garden, just kind of distinguishes the Japanese garden at Cheekwood that much more, and is kind of, elevates the space and kind of brings it into a new and modern era.
Well, with the sister city, Nashville sister city being one of them, being Kamakura, Japan, this has got to be a nice way to extend an invitation to those folks who do live in Kamakura to come visit it. I had a grandmother who worked in Kamakura in the 1920s, and it's since become a sister city, but it's just job well done. And I've got to ask you, like I did with the children's garden, what are your hopes and dreams? And how do you envision this being the asset that it is for the community? What does it mean to the community? What are your hopes for it being integrated into their lives?
Well, maybe I'll answer that in a couple different ways. And again, I like to draw on the distinctions between the 3 new offerings, new or refreshed offerings at Cheekwood: Children's Garden, Sculpture Trail, Japanese Garden. Children's Gardens, brand new, out of the ground, very impressive. Sculpture Trail, perfectly, it just very transformational. You might not even recognize it from the original trail experience at Cheekwood, except in its essence, and the interface between the woodland and the artwork, which was absolutely, protected and enhanced in that project. The Japanese garden, one of my hopes for the Japanese garden, to be frank, is people to walk in there and not even notice what has been done, right? So just say, oh, and if they do notice what was done, say, well, that was tasteful. So really kind of a light hand, again, to celebrate the original and now historic design layer, in that garden. So, I think that part of it is just to help people kind of celebrate one of the gardens that has always been a favorite feature of the offering at Cheekwood. And then, I think more than anything, and perhaps more than the other gardens at Cheekwood, I'd like for the Japanese garden to help give our visitors a sense of curiosity, right? And you talk about how our gardens can be, maybe, transformative or transport people to another world. Well, I want you, when you're sitting in that viewing pavilion, looking up at the hills beyond, I want you to think that you're in Japan. Forget that a moment that you're in Middle Tennessee, and just kind of put you wherever you want to be in your own space, mind space. So just to kind of enjoy it for what it is. Yeah, very proud of that one.
Peter, when were the restoration? When was the Japanese garden project just completed? The restoration project.
It was April of this year, this spring.
So you had both this and the children's garden projects being done at the same time.
All three of these projects were done at the same time. And absolutely some economies of scale, if you will, in that process. The Japanese garden, with respect to its physical vicinity, is perfectly contiguous with the sculpture trail, and so those two projects shared construction access. So to renovate the sculpture trail and then come back later and do the Japanese garden would have been very disruptive. But more than anything, it was kind of like we drew the curtains across half of the property there for a year or two, and then a little while later, coincidentally in our 60th anniversary year, and in a year when people need Cheekwood, as much or more than they ever had, then we pull that curtain back, and you've got a new Cheekwood to kind of help you to celebrate and frankly make it through 2020.
Well, I think with all that you've done, you didn't know that you needed to help us get through 2020, but the pockets of tranquility and beauty and connection to nature. And last week when we talked about the sculpture, we talked about being thoughtful and reflective. And I would say the same thing for the gardens. They provide that opportunity for someone to just get refueled in this crazy world that we're living in now, and do it in a safe way for where we are right now. So nice. We wouldn't expect anything less from Cheekwood. You've over-delivered again. It's just stunning, absolutely stunning.
Well, thank you. We are absolutely proud of it and excited to share it with the people of Nashville. These are not these are not our gardens. These are Nashville's gardens. So come out and see them.
Is there anything else you'd like to tell us about the gardens? But because we're coming up on our time, and but if you've got some other things that you might like to say, we'd love to hear them. But maybe we have covered everything.
Kathleen, I could talk for hours. I will say, if I may, extend a shameless plug for Chihuly at Cheekwood. Really an exceptional experience, and activates two of the three gardens that you've talked about and featured over the past couple of weeks, including the sculpture trail and the Japanese garden. So Cheekwood, many things, including a venue for the display of outdoor contemporary art. And that is going on right now, and is celebrating some of these spaces, helping us celebrate some of these spaces even more. Runs through the end of the year. So we'll be featured alongside our now very popular and successful Holiday Lights show, which I think is going to be a very dynamic display. Yeah, I guess the only thing I'd like to add is just come out and see us, buy a membership. And
you have evening hours with Chihuly, so you can really see it in several different lightings: the daytime lighting, dusk lighting, and evening. So you get completely different experiences when you visualize it or see it in those ways. And what a great addition to Cheekwood as it turns 60 years old. I mean, you couldn't have a bigger party. 2 major gardens opening, or being one new, one being renovated. So congratulations and happy birthday.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. And thank you again for the opportunity to kind of help share it with everybody in Bellevue and beyond, right?
Well, thank you, Peter. Once again, this is Peter Grimaldi, who oversees the gardens and the facilities at Cheekwood. No small job. We thank you for being part of the Community Arts of Bellevue's Live from the View series. We started this when COVID started. We've kept it going, and people seem to like it, so we're going to keep on doing it. So thank you all for joining us tonight. Peter, again, thank you, and thanks to Jane and Marin for the earlier series that they did with us, and we will say good night. Sayonara.